My wife wanted a break to find herself. Turns out she was secretly planning a new life with an unemployed guy in his mom's basement. My name's Alex, I'm 32, and I've been married to my wife Sarah for 8 years. We have a 6-year-old son named Marcus. We live in Ohio, where I work as a network administrator for a decent-sized company, bringing in around $75,000 a year, enough to keep us comfortable. Sarah used to have a part-time gig at a dental office, but about 2 years ago she made the decision to quit and stay home with Marcus full-time. I completely supported that choice. By the time we paid for daycare, most of her paycheck was gone anyway, and we figured we could get by just fine on my income alone. For a while, everything felt normal. Life was predictable, maybe a little boring, but in a stable and peaceful kind of way. That is, until around 6 months ago, when things with Sarah started feeling off. It wasn't anything huge or dramatic. She didn't turn into a stranger overnight. It was the small stuff at first. Little changes in her habits that didn't sit right. She was glued to her phone more than usual, not that people don't spend too much time on their phones these days, but it was how she acted with it. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd flip it face down or bring it with her into the bathroom like it was top secret. She started staying up late most nights, saying she was just watching Netflix or reading articles, but whenever I looked her way, she'd quickly switch screens like she didn't want me to see. And then she began saying things like she felt like she was losing her identity, like being a wife and a mom had swallowed her whole. Now, I know being a stay-at-home parent is exhausting. I respect the hell out of it. So when she opened up about feeling that way, I told her maybe we could find time for her to pick up a hobby or even ease back into part-time work if she wanted. The thing is, I've never been the jealous or paranoid type. I usually take things at face value and try to handle problems directly and calmly. So I figured if something serious was going on, we'd talk about it, adult to adult. But every time I tried to dig deeper, Sarah would hit me with vague lines about needing space and trying to figure out what she really wants out of life. I floated the idea of seeing a counselor together, but she brushed it off, saying she just needed time to sort through things on her own. Then, out of nowhere, about 4 months ago, Sarah told me she wanted to take a break from our marriage. Not a divorce, just a break. Her words. She said she felt trapped, like the walls were closing in, and she needed to step away to reconnect with the person she used to be before she became someone's wife and mother. She wanted to move in with her parents for a few weeks, maybe a month, and take Marcus with her. Her folks live about 40 minutes away, in a quiet town. It wasn't like she was asking to move to another state. Still, the whole idea felt off to me. I've seen what taking a break usually means, and it's rarely a good sign. It either means someone's already emotionally checked out, or worse, they've got someone else waiting in the wings. But Sarah swore up and down that this was just about her. That she still loved me, she just needed time away from our routines to breathe. I told her I thought it was a mistake, that we should face whatever this was together. But she wasn't budging. She said the only way to save the marriage might be to step back for a while. So I agreed. Not because I liked the idea, but because I didn't want to be the guy who made her feel even more trapped. She packed up her stuff and Marcus's, and they moved into her parents' place. We worked out an arrangement where Marcus would come stay with me on the weekends, and Sarah and I would check in every few days. She made it sound like it would last maybe 4 to 6 weeks, temporary. That first week felt weird as hell. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I missed Marcus's little voice during our bedtime routines. Sarah would send me pictures and updates about how he was doing, which helped a bit, but the phone calls between us were awkward and shallow. We talked about work, her parents, how Marcus was adjusting, never about us. Never about what she was thinking or where this break was even headed. By the second week, I noticed Sarah had suddenly gotten really active on social media, which was strange because she's never been into that stuff. Now she was posting pics of herself at cafes, walking trails, and local festivals. Every caption was something about self-growth, new experiences, or reclaiming her energy. A few of the pictures looked like someone else had taken them angles she couldn't have done herself, but she never mentioned seeing friends or who was with her. I brought it up on a call, casually, and she just said she was trying to get out more and meet people. Said she felt isolated after being stuck at home with Marcus for so long. Then Marcus started asking questions. Am I coming home soon? Are you and mommy getting divorced like Jason's parents? It broke my heart. I told him mommy was just spending some time with grandma and grandpa, and that we'd all be together again soon. But honestly, I didn't even believe it myself anymore. Sarah kept moving the goalpost. First, she needed 1 more week. Then it was 2. Then maybe through the end of the month. Anytime I tried to press her for a solid timeline or asked what exactly she was figuring out, she'd get defensive. She'd say I was putting too much pressure on her or that I wasn't respecting her space. That's when I started doing a little digging. Her whole story just didn't add up anymore. She was acting completely different from the woman I'd shared a life with for nearly a decade. I know my way around tech, so I looked into our phone records, and that's when things really hit me. There was one number that stood out. She'd been texting and calling it constantly. We're talking hours-long calls, late at night. The number had an out-of-state area code, nowhere near us or her parents. I did a reverse lookup and found the guy's name was Kevin. He lived all the way out in Portland, Oregon. His Facebook page told me everything I needed to know. He was 26, unemployed, living with his mom, and supposedly working on a music career while trying to grow a streaming following. His entire feed was full of self-pity posts about being misunderstood, whining about life, and ranting about relationships and women. But here's the part that made my stomach turn, as Sarah had been interacting with his posts for months, at least 7, way before she even mentioned needing space. At first, it was innocent. She'd leave a comment on his music, he'd say thanks. But over time, it became obvious they were building a connection. Public comments turned into flirtatious replies, then long private conversations and late-night phone calls. Suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't about Sarah needing time to find herself, it was about finding him. Some freeloading man-child in Oregon who played video games all day while his mom footed the bill. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to think, to figure out how to protect Marcus and what this meant for our future. So I started collecting evidence. Screenshots of their online conversations, Sarah's vague posts about new beginnings, Kevin's dramatic ones about finally feeling seen. I even printed out the phone records. Dozens of hours of calls. Hundreds of texts. Then one evening, while I was still compiling everything, Sarah called. She told me she wanted to extend the break indefinitely. She said she'd been doing a lot of soul searching and that she might be happier living somewhere new, starting a whole new life. She said she was thinking about starting over somewhere new, someplace with better opportunities and a different pace of life. When I asked what exactly she meant by that, she said she was considering a fresh start on the West Coast. Maybe Oregon. Maybe California. She wasn't sure yet. That's when it finally hit me, this wasn't just some emotional escape. Sarah was actually planning to move out there to be with him. With Kevin. And the worst part? She was thinking about bringing Marcus with her. I asked her straight up, "Are you seriously planning to move across the country and take our son with you?" She didn't give a clear yes or no. Just said she hadn't made any final decisions, but she was weighing all her options, trying to figure out what kind of future would be best for her and Marcus. I reminded her that this so-called break wasn't supposed to involve her packing up and leaving the state with our kid. But she pushed back. Said the time apart had helped her realize that staying in Ohio wasn't what was best long-term for either of them. She claimed Marcus would benefit from being in a new environment, having new experiences, and that if I still wanted to be part of his life, I could visit or even consider moving too. That hit me like a punch to the gut. It was like she was trying to erase our life and start over from scratch, just plugging Marcus into whatever fantasy she'd built with this guy online. I told her this wasn't something she could just decide on her own. We both had a say, and we needed to sit down face to face and talk it through like adults. She agreed to meet the next day, halfway between our house and her parents' place. When we met, I brought everything I'd found. Phone records, printed screenshots of her conversations and social media posts, Kevin's public declarations about his person. I laid it all on the table. Literally. I told her I knew about Kevin. That this wasn't about finding herself anymore, it was about having an emotional affair with some jobless 26-year-old guy who lived with his mom. Her face turned bright red. She looked cornered and flustered. She immediately went into defense mode, insisting it wasn't what I thought. That Kevin was just a friend who understood her. That they had a deep emotional connection, but it wasn't physical. I told her I didn't care if they'd slept together or not, she'd been lying to me for months, and now she was trying to take our son halfway across the country to playhouse with some guy she met on the internet. She said nothing was set in stone. That she was just exploring ideas. Then she pivoted to blaming me, saying she'd felt miserable in our marriage for years and that Kevin made her feel seen and alive in ways I never had. Apparently, Kevin believed in her and pushed her to dream bigger, while I just wanted to keep things the same forever, comfortable and dull. I told her she could dream all she wanted. She was free to go chase whatever fairy tale she wanted with Kevin. But Marcus was not going with her. That's when she called me controlling. Said I didn't get to decide what was best for Marcus on my own. She even claimed Kevin was great with kids and had helped her think through how to give Marcus a better life than what he had in Ohio. That was the final straw. I looked her dead in the eye and said I'd already spoken to a divorce lawyer. I'd be filing papers that week. If she wanted to uproot her life and move to Oregon, that was her choice. But Marcus was staying here, with his home, his school, his friends, and a father who actually had his priorities straight. Sarah completely blew up. Started shouting that I was trying to control her, that I was weaponizing Marcus to punish her for finally finding happiness. She yelled that she had spent years feeling ignored and unloved, and now that someone finally appreciated her, I couldn't handle it. I told her I wasn't destroying anything. She did that. She chose to lie, to cheat, and to plan a new life with a guy she'd never even met in person, all while pretending this was about growth. She finally admitted they hadn't met face to face yet, but she insisted that didn't make their connection any less meaningful. I said, sure, fine, call it meaningful all you want. But you don't get to drag our 6-year-old son into your fantasy with a broke guy you met online. We went back and forth for over an hour, her saying moving to Oregon would be better for Marcus, and me calling her out for trying to take him into a situation with zero stability. I reminded her that Kevin didn't have a job. He lived with his mom. There was no plan, no security, nothing that even remotely resembled a better life. The conversation ended with her accusing me of bullying her, and me telling her she was free to do whatever she wanted except take Marcus with her. She grabbed the stack of papers I'd brought and said she needed time to think things over. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. She'd supposedly been thinking for 4 months, just not about any of the things she should have been. That same afternoon, I went to my attorney's office and officially filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. I also requested full custody of Marcus, citing Sarah's plans to relocate him across the country for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with his best interests. My lawyer said the evidence I'd gathered was solid, especially the call logs, social media proof, and Kevin's public posts talking about Sarah like they were already in a relationship. The biggest advantage? Her clear intent to move Marcus out of state without even a stable housing or employment situation on the other end. That night, I called Sarah's parents to give them a heads up. They were stunned. Apparently, Sarah had told them this whole thing was just about needing space. She hadn't said a word about Kevin or moving across the country. Her dad was furious. Said he couldn't believe she was using their house as a launchpad to run off with some loser. Her mom was mostly worried about Marcus, about how all of this would impact him. The next day, Sarah called me in a rage. Screaming about how I blindsided her by filing for divorce and going to her parents behind her back. She said she thought we were going to work things out and that taking legal action was a nuclear option that ruined any chance of reconciliation. I told her the chance had been dead and buried the second she started up an affair and began making plans to move our son across the country without even talking to me about it. She tried to walk it back again, said she hadn't really decided anything and was just looking at her options. But I reminded her that Kevin had already been posting online about meeting the little man and being ready to step up. She couldn't deny it. I had screenshots. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah hired her own lawyer and tried to argue that she should get primary custody because she'd been Marcus's main caregiver for the past couple of years. But her attorney had a hard time spinning her situation into something positive. There was no way to justify moving a child away from his school, friends, and support system to go live with a guy who didn't have a job or his own place. The court put a temporary custody order in place. Marcus would live with me during the week and visit Sarah on weekends, as long as the visits happened in Ohio. She wasn't allowed to take him out of state without a judge's permission. That alone completely derailed her plans to head out west, at least for now. Sarah was livid. She kept saying I was using the courts to control her and block her from starting a new life. But to me, it was simple. She could build whatever life she wanted, but she wasn't dragging our son into a fantasy built on lies. Sarah told me Kevin was being incredibly supportive and understanding through everything. In fact, she said he was even thinking about moving to Ohio to be closer to her, which honestly made me laugh out loud. The guy couldn't even afford rent in Oregon, where the cost of living is way lower than it is here. How exactly was he going to relocate across the country and start over? It was ridiculous. Meanwhile, I had to sit down with Marcus and explain why mommy and daddy weren't living together anymore, and why we weren't visiting grandma and grandpa as much. I kept it simple, age appropriate. Told him that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about important things and need to live in separate homes while they figure stuff out. To my surprise, Marcus took it better than I expected, honestly better than either Sarah or I had. He seemed relieved to be back in his own bed, following his old routines again. Then, about 6 weeks after I filed the divorce papers, Sarah came by to pick Marcus up for her weekend visit. Out of nowhere, she said she'd been thinking a lot about our marriage and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to work things out. She admitted that her connection with Kevin had opened her eyes to what was missing in our relationship, but now she was wondering if we could rebuild what we'd lost, if we both really tried. I told her I wasn't interested in rebuilding anything with someone who lied to me for months and tried to move our son across the country just to be with her affair partner. Sarah pushed back and claimed it wasn't really an affair, since they'd never actually met or been physical. She told me she ended things with Kevin because it was interfering with her ability to co-parent with me. So I asked her point blank, did she end it because she realized it was wrong, or because the custody agreement made it impossible for her to go through with her original plan? She dodged the question. Went into this long monologue about how her priorities had changed and she now understood how serious things had gotten legally. That's when I knew the truth. Sarah didn't walk away from Kevin because she felt guilty. She hit pause because she was legally cornered. She was trying to circle back to me, not out of love, but because Plan A had fallen apart. And chances were, she was still talking to Kevin, just waiting to see if she could find a new workaround. I told her flat out I wasn't going to be her backup plan while she figured out how to make her long-distance relationship work inside the limitations of a court order. She said I wasn't being fair, that I wasn't giving her credit for trying to repair the damage. But I reminded her she only seemed interested in repairing things after the judge shut down her plan to move Marcus to Oregon. The divorce took a few more months to finalize. Her attorney threw out every possible argument to get her more custody or permission to relocate with Marcus. But none of it stuck. She couldn't prove that moving him would be in his best interest, and the court wasn't about to sign off on her uprooting him for a guy she'd met online, who didn't have a job or even a stable place to live. In the end, I was awarded primary physical custody. Sarah gets Marcus every other weekend and we alternate holidays. She's also responsible for a small amount of child support now, since I'm covering most of his daily expenses and she's expected to return to work full-time. The judge also ruled that neither of us can move more than 100 miles from where we currently live unless we go back to court for a custody modification hearing. Sarah eventually moved into a modest apartment about 20 minutes away and found work at another dental office. As far as I can tell, she's accepted, for now, at least, that the Oregon fantasy isn't happening. But I'd bet good money she's still in contact with Kevin. Her social media posts haven't changed much, still full of quotes about self-growth, new beginnings, and staying open to opportunities. Which, if you've been through this, sounds exactly like the kind of language someone uses when they're trying to justify their next escape plan. As for Marcus, he's adjusted really well to the new setup. He doesn't ask much about the divorce anymore. He knows mom and dad live in different houses now, and he seems secure in the fact that we both love him. Sarah's actually a decent mom when she's focused on parenting and not off chasing digital romance with some guy halfway across the country. So I'm glad he still gets to spend time with her. All of this taught me one very clear thing: when someone says they need a break to find themselves, what they really mean is they've already found someone else, and they're just buying time while they figure out how to switch over without blowing up their whole life. I'm not bitter that my marriage ended. If Sarah was that unhappy with me, then it's better we went our separate ways. But what I am angry about is how she tried to drag Marcus into the middle of it. She was willing to completely uproot his life, rip him out of school, away from his friends and everything familiar, just so she could chase some fantasy with a man who couldn't even support himself, let alone be a father figure. Now, my only focus is on being the best dad I can be, giving Marcus the structure, love, and consistency he deserves. Sarah can chase whatever connection she wants, but she's not going to use my son to justify her personal choices. And yeah, I don't regret filing for divorce when I did. Sarah likes to say she was just exploring options, but the reality is, she was preparing to take our son across the country for a guy she met online. And I wasn't about to stand by and let that happen. Update 1. A lot of people have asked how things have been going since my original post, so here's where we're at now. Sarah's been following the custody agreement. Things have stayed mostly smooth over the last couple of months. Marcus is doing well in school, and he seems totally adjusted to the back-and-forth rhythm now. She picks him up Friday evenings and drops him off Sunday night. They do the usual kid stuff, go to parks, catch movies, visit her parents. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But then, last week, something happened that confirmed exactly what I'd suspected. Marcus came back from his weekend with Sarah and casually mentioned that mommy's friend Kevin had been on video calls with them. I asked him what he meant, and he told me that Kevin had talked to him on a few different occasions, asked about his school, what games he liked, stuff like that. I called Sarah right away. She tried to brush it off, saying it was just a couple of video chats, and that Kevin was being nice and just wanted to get to know Marcus. She acted like it wasn't a big deal. I told her in no uncertain terms that I didn't want some guy from Oregon, the same guy she'd emotionally cheated on me with, talking to our son. She pushed back, said Kevin wasn't a stranger anymore. That they'd been talking for nearly a year now, and he genuinely cared about her and wanted to be part of her life, including the parts that involved Marcus. Apparently, Kevin had been asking about Marcus for months, and Sarah thought it would be sweet for them to connect even if just over FaceTime. I reminded her that our custody order clearly states that neither of us can introduce Marcus to any romantic partners without talking to the other parent first. Her defense? Kevin wasn't technically a romantic partner. Because they'd never met in person and the distance plus legal stuff made things complicated. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. Sarah still hadn't let go. Even though she couldn't physically move to Oregon anymore, she was still trying to find a way to make this relationship with Kevin work one video call at a time. I figured Sarah had probably been telling Kevin all about the custody restrictions and that the two of them were brainstorming ways to keep their relationship alive, ways that involved getting Kevin into Marcus's life. It felt like their new angle was to test the waters and see how Kevin and Marcus got along, like they were already mapping out a future together. I told Sarah in no uncertain terms any further contact between Kevin and Marcus had to stop immediately. If I found out she was still sneaking in conversations or letting Kevin talk to our son behind my back, I'd be going straight back to court to have the custody arrangement modified. Of course, she accused me of being controlling. Said I was trying to dictate who she could talk to and who Marcus could meet. But I told her this wasn't about control, it was about protecting our son. I wasn't going to sit back and let my ex-wife's affair partner become part of my child's life. That's not being possessive. That's called being a responsible father. She eventually agreed to stop the video calls, but made it clear she thought I was completely overreacting. She said Kevin was kind and supportive and could actually be a positive influence for Marcus if things between them got more serious. I shut that down immediately. I told her this wasn't going to become some fantasy version of a blended family where her affair turns into a fairy tale ending, with Kevin stepping in as a stepdad. That's not how this works. She said she understood where I was coming from but still felt like I was being unfair to Kevin, someone she claimed had done nothing but support her during a tough time. I told her if Kevin's idea of being supportive was encouraging her to cheat and plan to move our son across the country without my knowledge, then no, he's not a good guy. He's someone who was willing to help blow up a family for his own benefit. Since then, I've been keeping a much closer eye on Marcus's visits with Sarah. I ask him more questions about what they do and who they talk to. So far, it seems like the video calls with Kevin have stopped. But honestly, I don't trust her to keep that boundary for long. I'm watching carefully. Update 2. About a month ago, Sarah started hinting that she wanted more summer custody time with Marcus. She said she wanted to take him on a longer vacation, maybe explore new places together. I asked for details, but her answers were vague. She didn't say where exactly she wanted to go or how long they'd be gone. Then, 2 weeks ago, Marcus came home from one of his weekends with her and mentioned something that made everything click. He said Mommy was talking about going on a big trip to the mountains and maybe visiting someone who'd wanted to meet him for a long time. I asked a few more questions, and Marcus said Sarah had shown him pictures of mountains and a large house. He also said the person they might visit was Mommy's special friend who lives really far away. At that point, I knew exactly what she was planning. She was getting ready to take Marcus to Oregon to finally introduce him to Kevin, in direct violation of our custody agreement. I called her that night and confronted her about it. She didn't deny it. She admitted she'd been considering a trip to Oregon during Marcus's summer break, just for a week, she said, so we could see a different part of the country and meet Kevin in person. I reminded her, firmly, that taking Marcus out of state required court approval. She pushed back and claimed she thought the restriction was only temporary, just something that applied while we were going through the divorce. I had to explain that no, those travel restrictions are part of the final, permanent custody order. She got defensive and said I was trapping Marcus in Ohio, limiting his experiences, keeping him from growing. Then she said Kevin had been looking forward to meeting Marcus for months and had even planned activities like hiking and visiting some music studio where he records. I told her I didn't care what Kevin had planned. He wasn't meeting my son. Period. She said I was being unreasonable. That Marcus had a right to know the important people in her life, especially someone who might become part of their future. Then she dropped another bombshell. She and Kevin had been talking about flipping the plan, not her moving to Oregon, but Kevin relocating to Ohio. Apparently, Kevin was now motivated to get his life together so he could be closer to Sarah and Marcus. He was looking into work opportunities near us and supposedly ready to make changes and build something real. I asked her if she seriously thought this was realistic. This guy who still lived with his mother and couldn't find work in his own state was suddenly going to move across the country, land a job, and become a reliable presence in our son's life? She insisted Kevin had a new sense of purpose now. That being with her and Marcus gave him something to work toward. All I could do was shake my head. It was obvious Sarah hadn't given up on the relationship. They just shifted strategies. Instead of her taking Marcus to Oregon, now Kevin would come to us. She was likely still planning to introduce them this summer, just under a different context, Kevin checking out Ohio instead of them visiting him. I made it crystal clear, I didn't care where it happened. Kevin was not meeting Marcus. Not in Oregon, not in Ohio, not anywhere. She said I couldn't control who she dated or who she let Marcus meet forever. Eventually, she said, Kevin would be a permanent part of their lives whether I liked it or not. I told her flat out, if she tried to take Marcus out of state without permission, I would file for custodial interference and push to have her visitation suspended. She accused me of threatening her and being vindictive. But I told her the truth, I was protecting my son from her continued reckless judgment. The next day, I called my lawyer and filled him in on everything: Sarah's plan to take Marcus to Oregon, the ongoing relationship with Kevin, and her attempt to bypass the court order. He said we could go back to court to file for a custody modification, one that made the travel restrictions even tighter and gave us stronger grounds if she tried to pull this again. We filed a motion asking the court to make it explicit that Sarah couldn't take Marcus out of state under any circumstances without written approval. We also asked for her to be held in contempt if she continued planning these unauthorized trips. And we requested that she be required to submit detailed itineraries for any overnight trips even if they were within Ohio. Sarah's attorney fired back, saying the original order was too restrictive and that she should be allowed to travel with Marcus during her scheduled time as long as she gave me reasonable notice. They argued that denying Sarah vacation time was harmful to her relationship with Marcus and his development. The hearing was last week. Under oath, Sarah admitted that she'd been in regular contact with Kevin during the entire divorce process. She admitted they'd been planning for Kevin to meet Marcus for months. She also admitted that they were seriously discussing Kevin moving to Ohio. The judge didn't take it well. He called out Sarah for being dishonest about ending things with Kevin and for actively planning to violate the custody agreement. He said bringing Marcus into contact with her affair partner, especially without my consent, showed a serious lack of parental judgment. The judge approved all of our requests. The custody order was officially updated to make it crystal clear: Sarah cannot take Marcus outside of Ohio without prior written court approval. Any violation of that rule will result in her custody being immediately suspended. He also ordered that Sarah is not allowed to introduce Marcus to any romantic partners unless she notifies me and the court in advance. And if introductions are ever approved, they must happen gradually, with Marcus's well-being as the top priority. Sarah was furious. Outside the courthouse, she told me this wasn't over and that she'd find a way to bring Kevin into Marcus's life, one way or another. I told her the truth: she needed to accept that Kevin was not going to be a part of our son's life. And if she kept pushing this, she was only going to lose even more time with Marcus. She shot back that Kevin wasn't going anywhere and that I just have to get used to it. Since the hearing, she's been following the new court order, at least on paper. Marcus still visits her every other weekend, but now under much stricter guidelines. No travel without approval. No unapproved introductions. Marcus hasn't mentioned Kevin again, and I'm hoping that's a good sign. But deep down, I doubt she's truly let go. She's probably just being more careful now, not because she respects the rules, but because she doesn't want to get caught again. I'm prepared to go back to court as many times as I need to. Because my son deserves stability and peace, not to be dragged into the middle of his mom's romantic drama with a stranger from across the country. So that's where things stand now. Sarah is still trying to make things work with Kevin, but the legal protections are stronger and I'm not letting my guard down again. Marcus deserves better. And I'm going to make sure he gets it.